I will not hand over what is mine without record.
Procedure is all that matters here.
Then why does my skin make you doubt my right to be here?
Because power decides who belongs, not your word.
The words struck like iron on stone, echoing across the courthouse steps where time seemed to slow. Around them, the crowd's silence grew heavier, as though the entire city waited to see which would hold the truth in her voice or the power in his. This was no longer a simple exchange. It was the edge of a battle between dignity and authority, and every heartbeat made the question sharper: who would prevail? If this moment gripped you, leave a comment with the word justice and follow for the next chapter, because the fight is only beginning. Angela Brooks set out for downtown with the quiet steadiness of someone who had lived through many busy court mornings. The air over Atlanta was already warm, the kind that softened the horizon and made the flags along Peachtree sway like slow metronomes. Memorial Day bunting hung from porch rails and storefronts. Neighbors waved as she eased her sedan out of the driveway, a palm raised from the steering wheel in that small southern greeting that needed no words. She preferred the early hour, when the city sounded like tires whispering and sparrows chattering, when her mind could settle before the day's arguments and filings. She had promised herself a cappuccino and 5 unhurried minutes to taste it. Traffic flowed past murals and brick warehouses reborn as lofts. She caught the morning news on low volume, a host with a velvet voice reminding listeners of the parade schedule and a safety notice about street closures near the federal courthouse. She clicked the radio off and let the soft rumble of the engine keep her company. On Peachtree, the sidewalks were busy already. A marching band in practice shirts clustered near a corner. A troop leader shepherded scouts in sun hats. A pair of veterans pinned poppies to their caps. The city felt generous, its rhythms measured, its faces open. At the Starbucks near the courthouse lobby, the line moved with the familiar choreography of takeout coffee. "Good morning, ma'am," the barista said, meeting Angela's eyes with that practiced brightness that still felt human. "Cappuccino? Extra dry?" Angela smiled. "Yes, please." She left a tip in the jar, the clink of the coins a small pledge to kindness. The foam was light as a cloud. She held the cup in both hands to feel the warmth through the cardboard sleeve, then stepped back outside where sunlight laid a pale coin on the hood of every car. The courthouse rose ahead with its cool stone and orderly windows, a building that had taught her, over many years, to breathe evenly when other people could not. She watched the father lift his daughter so she could touch the bronze scales of justice in the plaza, and she thought of all the mornings when the right word spoken at the right moment had steadied her life. Today would be ordinary, she told herself. A docket with a few naughty motions, a brief status conference, some quiet hours with case law and a yellow pencil. She straightened her jacket and felt for her badge in the inner pocket out of instinct more than need. She crossed the street with a walk signal and joined the stream of employees and visitors heading for the security line. A security officer nodded to her with a neutral politeness. "Morning." She nodded back and took her place, listening to the echo of footsteps, the soft conversation at the magnetometers, the reminder sign about no food or drink beyond the checkpoint. She took a last sip, then tossed the cup in the bin, smoothing the lid down so it would not pop back up. The building smelled faintly of floor cleaner and paper. Familiar, predictable. She felt her shoulders loosen. On the far side of the foyer, 2 officers stood near a concrete pillar where the shadow from the portico cut the light. Their posture had that casual alertness that suggested they were waiting more than watching. Angela noticed the smallest things first, the way one officer's gaze paused on people's shoes, the way the other tilted his head when a woman with a stroller approached. She recognized the posture of assessment. It did not trouble her. She had long ago learned the difference between vigilance and suspicion. Even so, a thread of caution lifted inside her, as if a violin string had been tuned tighter by an unseen hand. Outside again to the broad steps, the main entrance doors were propped for delivery. She felt the heat rising from the stone. A marching band's drums thudded from farther down the avenue, steady as a parade heartbeat. She could almost see the young drummers counting, lips moving. A volunteer handed out little paper flags and told the passerby where the best viewing spot would be. Angela thanked him and stepped out of the flow of people to adjust her briefcase strap. She loved these civic mornings when the city celebrated service. Even the impatient drivers seemed to leave room at the corners for pedestrians. She started up the steps with the calm pace of routine. A voice called from the pillar's shade, friendly on its surface. "Ma'am, could you hold up a second?" She turned. The officer who had been watching shoes was taller than she had realized, square in the shoulders, a face that could turn from bland to hard with a small change around the eyes. The badge caught the sun and tossed it back at her. His partner hung a half step behind, hands loose, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Angela stopped and rested the briefcase against her leg. "Good morning," she said. "Is there an issue?" The taller officer's gaze moved over her, not lingering on any one thing and yet cataloging everything. "Just a quick check," he said. "Lot of event traffic today. We need to verify who's coming in and why." He glanced toward the doors as if the building were suddenly more precious. The drums from the parade shifted tempo, a flourish rippling along the street. She reached into her jacket and took out her identification with the efficient grace of someone who had done this countless times without incident. "Of course," she said. "Here you are." He did not take the badge. He looked at it as if paper could lie by itself. The partner's smile widened by a fraction, a social transaction that felt like a test. Angela waited. It was important in these exchanges to let the silence say what needed saying, that she was not hurried, not defensive, not confused about the ground she stood on. A breeze lifted the corner of a nearby banner. The fabric snapped softly. The officer shifted his weight and asked a question that sounded polite enough. Where she worked, what office, what floor. She answered with the same courteous specificity she used for jurors. Questions, nothing extra, nothing withheld. The partner's eyes slid briefly toward passers-by, perhaps gauging their attention, perhaps counting witnesses. Angela noticed the line at the side entrance growing. She glanced at the time in the old way without looking at a watch, simply measuring the morning's angle, the marcher volume, the thinness of shadows. Inside, at security, a clerk laughed at something a visitor said, the sound bright and quick. The courthouse held so many small human moments like that, braided among the tense ones. Angela thought of the first calendar item she needed to review and of the clerk down the hall who kept peppermints in the crystal bowl on her desk. The thought steadied her further. She had always believed that the rituals of a place, its greetings, its remembered names, its shared coffee, were the real architecture far more than steel and stone. The taller officer's gaze returned to the badge still in her open palm. He still did not take it. "Busy morning," he said. "We've got to make sure nobody wanders in where they shouldn't." There was a softness to his words that did not match the way his shoulders squared as he spoke. She saw it because she had been watching people her entire career, noting the tiny mismatches between tone and posture, promise and intention. She did not let the recognition change her voice. "That makes sense," she said. "Let me know what you need to see." Foot traffic thickened at the edge of the plaza. A mother asked a volunteer where to park. A vendor wheeled a cooler along, the eyes chiming against plastic. A man in a veteran's cap paused to read the engraved names on the courthouse plaque and rested his hand on the bronze for a moment, as if greeting an old friend. The city's ordinary mercies held together like threads in a net. Angela let them hold her too. When she shifted her weight to resume climbing the stairs, the officer adjusted his stance to remain in front of her. It was such a small thing, a quarter step, a rearranging of air between two people, and yet the meaning of it rang clear as a bell. She understood that the morning's ease was narrowing, that simple courtesies were about to be replaced by something more brittle. She lifted her chin a fraction, a gesture that in other rooms meant ready when you are counselor. From the street came a sudden bright flourish of brass, then the steady cadence again. The partner's smile thinned and disappeared, replaced by a professional blank. Somewhere inside the building, a door closed with a padded thump. Angela breathed once, slow and square, the way she had taught anxious witnesses to breathe before they spoke. The steps between them felt flatter and hotter, as if the sun had leaned closer. She kept her voice even. "If you need to scan the badge, we can do it inside," she said. "There is a separate lane for employees." She did not add a title after the word employees. She did not need to. Her posture already said she belonged. The officer's eyes flicked to the doors and back. She had seen this calculation before. The choice between facilitating someone's passage and asserting the right to obstruct it. The moment stretched. She heard a faint hiss from a soda can being opened by the vendor. the kind of domestic sound that often breaks tension. It did not break this one. The officer's jaw worked once, as if he had decided something. Angela felt the day tilt on its axis, only a little, like a picture frame gone a shade crooked on the wall. She thought of the parade again, and of the father lifting his daughter to touch bronze scales. She thought of the stories a city tells itself about itself, and how those stories depend on small choices at thresholds. She did not move first. She let the officer move first so the record would be clear in her memory. Where he stood, how much space he left between them. She let the morning light fix the details like a photograph. She let her hand rest open with the badge visible, an invitation to process rather than to posture. In that open space, she remained exactly who she was, a woman on her way to do her work, on a day when the city celebrated service and sacrifice. Officer Reynolds narrowed his eyes, took one step toward Angela, his hand settling at his belt as if ready to block her. The shift in his posture lingered like a crease in the morning, and Angela understood that this would not be a passing exchange. The plaza's heat pressed up from the stone steps. Brass from the distant marching band rolled the air in bright ribbons. She eased her briefcase strap on her shoulder and kept her voice level, the way she had coached frightened witnesses to do when their hearts ran fast. "Good morning," she said again, as if she and the taller officer were equal shareholders in the day. "How can I help?" He had the composed squint of someone who preferred to decide the answer before asking the question. "Name and purpose," he said. "We've got parade crowds, tight protocols." She offered her identification once more, holding it so the seal and the photograph were steady in the light. A half step behind the second officer, Carter. According to the name, Plate lifted his phone and tilted it in a way that suggested habit more than policy, the offhand angle of a man who enjoyed recording the story he preferred. "Let's see," the taller officer said. His badge read Reynolds. He did not touch her identification. He glanced over it as if the ink itself might be a trick. "We get a lot of folks trying to cut through the building on days like this." "This entrance is not a cut-through," Angela said, a mild correction, the kind a seasoned teacher offers a student she expects to see again. "And I'm headed to work." Carter's mouth twitched. Everybody's headed to work. A gust carried the scent of hot pretzels from a vendor cart down the block. The courthouse doors breathed people in and out, a hush each time the air seal released. Angela saw a clerk she knew in line at the magnetometer, a woman who favored pearl studs and kept peppermints in a cut glass bowl. The clerk lifted her hand when she recognized Angela, then lowered it, uncertain, when she saw the officers. Reynolds shifted enough to cast a longer shadow across the step. "Where exactly do you work?" he asked. The politeness had a burr to it now, as though the word exactly were a stone in his shoe. "In this building," she said. She gave the floor and office, simple as a map, no flourish. "The ID looks unusual," Carter said, angling his phone for a better frame. "Lot of fancy seals out there these days." The third officer, Blake, arrived from the foyer with a paper cup and a narrow grin, as if he had paid for a show and come back with refreshments. He took in the scene, placed himself at Reynolds' shoulder, and said nothing. Sometimes nothing says more than it intends. "Gentlemen," Angela said, "and let the courtesy be the preface. If you need to validate an employee badge, there's a desk for that just inside." Reynolds' gaze did not follow her gesture toward the door. It fastened instead on the briefcase, the conservative cut of her jacket, the calmness he could not catalog. "We've had reports," he said. "From whom?" she asked. Not aggressively, simply asking a question the way one asks for a case number when a file is missing. "From security," Reynolds said. His tone suggested that the word was sufficient authority. "Then security can scan the badge," she said. "We'll be done in a minute." Carter let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh if it had more air in it. The bent-down Peachtree hit a drum break and the sound ricocheted between buildings. A child waved a paper flag until it bent at the stick. His grandmother smoothed it straight and patted his shoulder. "What's in the briefcase?" Blake asked, as if they had already moved past who and why into what. "Work materials," Angela said. "Legal stuff?" Carter said, chin lifting, phone lens catching a glint of Sunday. "Yes," Angela said. "Big day for legal stuff," Carter said. "To no one. to the phone. Angela kept her feet planted where they were. She had done this dance in different costumes, different addresses, the same little theater. She recognized the moment when professional curiosity shifts into personal suspicion, when a question stops seeking an answer and starts mining for doubt. She let her breath slow. Her throat was not tight. Her hands did not shake. She knew the value of narration to anyone watching, and to the one being watched. "Officer Reynolds," she said, choosing his name the way one selects the right tool. "I am headed to my office. If there is a verification step you require, I am prepared to walk inside and complete it." He looked past her toward the doors again, as if there were something behind the glass that would fall apart if she crossed that threshold. "Not yet," he said. "You can wait here." "For how long?" she asked. "As long as it takes," he said, and the phrase had the weight of habit. Visitors continued to pass through the magnetometers, belts in plastic bins, keys in gray trays. The security officers inside did their practice ballet, friendly and firm. It was all so ordinary that the strangeness at the foot of the steps made itself more visible by contrast. Angela felt the eyes of people moving around the edges of the moment. People sense when a scene is trying to become a spectacle. Blake took a sip and crumpled the lid with his fingers. "We see a lot of creative ideas," he said, "compatible as a man in a grocery line making conversation that was not conversation at all. I'm offering the straightforward path," Angela said. "Let us take it." Reynolds' mouth settled into a line. "What office did you say again?" He asked it as if repetition might reveal a seam to pull. She told him again, the same words in the same order. Carter lowered his phone a fraction. "You know, I'm not sure she understands how seriously we take this. Highway." "I understand," Angela said. Her voice held a softness that was not surrender. "That is why I am cooperating." Reynolds nodded at the badge in her hand. "Where did you get that?" "From the administrative office in this building," she said. "Where they issue them. Looks expensive," Blake said, as if to himself, as if the cost of an object were evidence of anything except craftsmanship. "Officers," Angela said, and felt the day pivot on this word. "You may either scan the badge in the interior lane or explain the specific policy that prevents you from doing so. I will follow policy." Reynolds' eyes sharpened. Rules are comfortable when they belong to you, less so when they demand reciprocity. He took one deliberate pace to his left, and in so doing, placed himself squarely between Angela and the doors. The geometry now was unmistakable. He had arranged himself as a barrier. A ripple of disappointment moved through the small group of people behind Angela, who had angled their steps to go around her. Someone sighed. A man in a navy suit looked at his watch, then put it away, contrite about what the gesture might imply. The grandmother with a paper flag steered her grandson toward the plaza fountain. A volunteer came by with a bucket of ice and said a cheerful good morning to no one in particular, as if a cheerful good morning were a broom for sweeping discomfort. Angela thought briefly of the many times she had wanted a situation to be less than what it was. Intention cannot erase the shape of a thing. She placed the identification in her inner pocket with the carefulness of someone returning a valuable instrument to its case. "I have given you the opportunity to verify my credentials," she said. "You have chosen not to. I will not stand here all morning narrating your options. Please allow me to enter and we will complete your verification inside." I da 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 da. Reynolds glanced at Carter. Carter lifted the phone again like a baton, and the orchestra resumed. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, "you can wait right where you are." "Oh, for what?" Angela asked, and the question did not move. "For me to decide what happens next," he said. The statement was not loud. It did not need to be. Blake's grin flattened. He shifted his cup to his other hand and lined his shoulders with Reynolds's, the way geese align in a sky nobody owns. Angela scanned the foyer behind the glass. She could see the security station that would, in less than a minute, confirm what her badge already said. She could see the clerk with a peppermint bowl holding a folder in both hands now, uncertainty working the corners of her mouth. Angela noted the position of the hallway camera and the way the foyer light fell across the floor. She noted the time as a matter of form. Though she kept it in words rather than numerals, the better to remember it later without a page to anchor it. We can do this two ways, Reynolds said. He had borrowed the phrasing from countless television shows and 100 real encounters. You cooperate, or you make this more complicated. I have been cooperating, Angela said. She kept her shoulders soft. I brought my identification. I offered the proper lane for scanning. I have answered your questions. Where were you before you came here? Carter asked. On Peachtree, she said. Like everyone else, what's the office phone number of the place you say you work? Blake asked, as if there were a magic trick in the digits, as if the ability to recite a string of numbers were the true test of belonging. I'm not going to play a memory quiz on the steps, Angela said. We will go inside, and you will do your job with the tools designed for it. Veitai efferblay. Not today, Reynolds said. The parade drums filled a pause behind his words, sounding like resolve to those who wanted to hear it that way. Angela considered the careful gray of his uniform, the crisp crease in his sleeve, the shine on his badge. She considered the things uniforms can do for a person and the things they cannot. She considered the boy with the paper flag and the brown scales in the plaza, how the father had lifted that small arm so the child could feel the cool metal. She considered the door and the desk beyond it, and the absurdity of standing on the threshold of her workplace arguing about whether the threshold existed. Officer, she said, and every syllable landed quietly. You are not following your own procedure. Procedure is what I say it is, Reynolds replied. There it was. The core of it lay flat. Angela felt a peculiar lightness then, the kind that comes when ambiguity gives way to clarity. She had not invited this confrontation, and she would not dramatize it, but neither would she misname it. A courier walked up the steps with a dolly stacked with cardboard boxes, hesitated, then took the side entrance. The building accepted him without fuss. Carter, perhaps sensing that the scene needed words to justify the video, supplied them. We get folks claiming all kinds of things, he said. Judge, lawyer, senator, you would be amazed. Claims are easy, Blake added. Proof is something else. Proof is exactly what I offered you, Angela said, and you refused it. Reynolds leaned in a fraction, not enough to crowd, enough to suggest that the ground had tilted toward his preference. You can wait, he said again. He had made it a spell. Perhaps it felt like one to him. The band's brass climbed a bright phrase, and the drums answered, and exchanged 2 streets away that still managed to put his thumb on the tempo of the moment on the steps. A gust lifted the edge of Angela's jacket. She steadied the fabric with a hand that did not tremble. The plaza, with its mingled scents of hot pretzels and sunscreen and floor polish, held its breath. Angela stood straight, met Reynolds' eyes, and said calmly, You just made a serious mistake. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She reached for the inner pocket of her jacket to put the badge away and to lift her briefcase strap higher on her shoulder, an ordinary movement that belonged to thousands of mornings just like this one. The plaza air wavered with heat. Drums and brass drifted down Peachtree in bright threads, and somewhere a vendor cracked ice with a scoop so the sound tinkled like small bells. Reynolds held his ground. Carter adjusted his phone so the lens took in the steps, the pillar, the sweep of stone, and Angela's face in a tidy frame. Blake leaned his shoulder to the pillar and took a sip, the lid making a small hollow sound as it flexed in his hand. Ma'am, Reynolds said, as if they were passing a neighborly greeting across a fence line, I will need that bag. Angela rested her palm on the briefcase. That contains work materials, she said. Calm the way a calm day is calm. Not empty, but steady. The correct place to examine them is inside with the proper staff, so the chain of custody is clear and the materials are not misplaced. Blake's smile crept back. Chain of custody, he repeated, like a phrase he had heard somebody else use and wanted to try on. That's a fancy term. Then's, it is an ordinary term, Angela said. Still gentle. It keeps people honest. Carter panned the phone slightly to capture her profile. Reynolds' hand shifted so the heel of his palm hovered near the briefcase clasp. Open it, he said. She measured the degree to which his request was a request and then measured the harm of refusing in the open air With no desk between them, no log, no receipt, no witness with a pen, she has spent her life counting those kinds of costs. We will do this inside, she said. We will take less than a minute, and everyone will be satisfied that policy has been followed. Reynolds' jaw worked. Policy is not the same on parade days, he said. Policy is policy, Angela said. Days do not change it. Carter's thumb tapped the screen, perhaps to lock focus, perhaps out of habit. A pair of courthouse employees in summer suits made a loose circle around the edge of the scene and then, thinking better of it, slipped toward the side entrance. The grandmother, with a paper flag, perched on the fountain rim and murmured to the boy, who looked up with wide, solemn eyes, as if he understood that grown-ups sometimes turned a bright morning into a weather the forecast did not promise. Hands off the bag, Reynolds said, suddenly, a notch louder, as if he needed an audience to anchor authority. Step back. Angela removed her palm. She did not step back. She shaped the stillness between them into a kind of refusal that was not a refusal so much as a standing where she already stood. Officer, she said, you are not using the tools designed to spare us both confusion. We have the tools we need, he replied. And with that, he plucked the briefcase from her and handed it to Blake, who pivoted, flipped the latches, and raised the lid with a flourish meant for the phone's eye. Inside, neat folders lay in a precise fan of tabs, handwritten notes on yellow pad paper, a pen settled in the spine like a bookmark. The scent of paper and ink rose and curtained the smell of sunscreen and hot pretzels. Blake's grin faltered as if the orderliness disappointed him. Carter's voice sidled into the empty space. Let's have a look, he said, zooming a little. He aimed the lens as if the camera could interpret what it recorded better than a clerk could. Reynolds slid out the folder. Angela named it in her mind, not out loud, the way one names a landmark when the lights go out to keep a sense of place. She saw his thumb crease the edge. She saw a slip of a sticky flag curl back like a leaf under frost. She felt the old ache that came when people handled things they did not understand with hands that did not know they were clumsy. You are disturbing work product, she said, more quietly now. You must stop. Or what? Blake asked, not yet unkind, only curious about boundary lines, the way boys are curious about fences. Or you will be accountable for the disturbance, Angela said. She did not raise her volume. Inside, there is a desk where you sign a sheet and a person who checks the form and a scanner that locks the time. That is what these documents deserve. That is what you deserve, too. Don't know. Reynolds returned the folder to the case, not quite where it had been, as if a small disorder might declare itself a kind of victory. What we deserve, he said, is cooperation. He closed the briefcase sharply and handed it back to himself, which is to say, he kept it. Carter shifted to frame Angela's face again, ready to harvest reaction like fruit. She gave him none. She had learned a lifetime ago that the gift you do not give cannot be taken. Officer Reynolds, she said, if you are filming, we are both preserving a record. I would like you to say clearly into your phone that you have declined to validate my badge inside and that you have removed my briefcase from my possession on the steps without a receipt. Carter blinked. Blake's head cocked. Reynolds' eyes flattened. Not angry, exactly, but irritated at the introduction of a sentence he had not planned to speak. He did not speak it. He glanced to the side instead, a reflex that sought a superior who was not there. The parade drum stitched another red seam down the avenue. A high school band hit a clean row of notes and the cheer rose like a wave. The city did not pause for what was happening on the steps. It almost never does. Angela let the sound pass through her like steadying air. She thought of the clerk with the peppermint bowl again and imagined the cool sting of the candy on the tongue, how it cleared the mind and sharpened the edge of a word before it left the mouth. Blake straightened. We're done talking, he said, announcing a finish that had not yet begun. Ma'am, put your hands where I can see them. My hands have been visible the whole time, Angela said. We are on the steps of a courthouse. A verification table is inside that door. Do not invent a rule on stone when a real one sits 10 paces away. Reynolds glanced at Carter's phone as if hunting for and finding in the screen a version of the moment he would prefer to inhabit. This is gonna go easy, he said. The way a man says to himself that a machine will cooperate if he pushes the right buttons. Easy, Blake echoed, as if the word were a cue more than a description. Angela lifted her chin a fraction. It would be easy, she said, if you would do your job as written. There was a pause then, a small inward bend in time when people decide who they are going to be, and the decision fixes itself with the permanence of ink. Reynolds stepped in and reached for Angela's phone where it rested in the side pocket of her jacket. His fingers brushed the fabric at her shoulder, and the touch changed the scene the way a single wrong word can tilt a conversation so the rest of it slides where nobody meant it to go. Do not touch me, she said, calm as a statement of weather. You will take my phone by receipt, or you will leave it where it is. Well, take it now, he said, and when he tugged, the jacket moved her a half step with it. The onlooker breath drew in at once, the sound a hush that swept the pew before him. Officer Angela said, You have exceeded your authority. Resisting, Carter said to the phone. Like a narrator laying track for a story he would later insist the train had followed all along. Angela placed her feet, the way she had taught nervous witnesses to do, even in shoes that pinched, and made her voice gentle in a way that admitted no confusion. I am not resisting. I am refusing to surrender property on the steps without a record. That is different. Use words with care. Beirut. Ma'am, Blake said, setting his cup on the pillar ledge, turn around. The moment we passed through the door, Angela said, I will do exactly as you instruct. Not here. Reynolds' face closed, not with fury, but with the practiced certainty of a man who believes that the word no is a test he is obliged to pass. He reached for her wrist. Angela did not wrench it away. She did not twist. She let him take her arm so the motion would be clean on any camera that watched. The angle of his elbow, the placement of his palm, the distance she held from the line of the stair. We will go inside, she said again, as if words might still be a bridge. Blake moved in at her other side. Carter, emboldened by the choreography he had wished for, stepped closer to record the frame he wanted. Look here, he said softly to the phone, the way a man whispers to a pet to get its attention. Take a good look. The clerk with the peppermint bowl stood behind the glass now, her hand half lifted, a paper in her fingers. Angela could not read the expression on the clerk's face. She read only the posture, that slight forward tilt of the body that says a person wants to help and does not know how to. Officer Reynolds, Angela said, one last time selecting his name as a kind of tether to shared ground. You can still choose to walk me inside. Ya. He lifted her arm behind her in a practiced arc toward the place where a wrist meets a restraint. The motion was measured rather than rough, efficient rather than showy, the way a man closes a drawer that he owns even when it sticks. Carter stepped to the side to keep the shot clear. Blake's hand found the other wrist by muscle memory. The world steadied itself around the mechanics of the moment. Footsteps tamped the plaza into a silence that was not actually silence, only the focus that falls when strangers become witnesses. Do you understand? Angela said. And the question carried no fear, only record that a desk 10 steps away would have met your need and mine? Nobody is above the rules, Reynolds said, which is a sentence that can mean too many different things depending on who speaks it and why. From the street, a trumpet caught sunlight and threw it back as sound. It ran off the courthouse face and down the stairwell. Carter's phone captured the angle of Angela's shoulders, the set of her neck, the tilt of Reynolds' head. Blake reached for the small metal tool at his belt, the one designed to announce a decision in the language of steel. He looked to Reynolds for a nod he had already received in everything but a gesture. Angela straightened her spine through the middle and steadied her breath, the way a person steadies the line of a signature when the paper is slick. The cold click of the cuffs sounded, and in that instant, Angela knew she was no longer being seen as a judge only, as a black suspect. The hum of the air conditioner filled the small processing room with a tired, steady sound, the sort of white noise that loosens time from its hinges. Fluorescent light flattened every surface into a paler version of itself. Angela sat on a molded plastic chair, her hands resting still on her lap, the briefcase placed on a metal table farther than necessary from where she Saturday. The cuffs were gone, but the memory of their cold precision lingered on the skin like the echo of a bell. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine released a soda with a thunk, and the carbonation hissed like a whisper through teeth. The building thrummed with Memorial Day traffic. Officers called to one another across the corridor, a clerk jogged past with a clipboard, and the elevator chimed its way between floors. She breathed evenly and let her eyes move as if reading a page. The wall clock with its second hand nudging forward, the camera bubble high in the corner with its tinted dome, the logbook on the counter where a pen lay diagonally across an empty line. She noted the names sewn onto uniforms, the protocol posters, the placement of the scanner used for employee badges. Every detail was a stitch in a fabric she knew by heart. Calm did not mean she accepted the shape of the morning. Calm meant she would name it clearly. Reynolds stood with his back to the door, half guarding, half announcing ownership of the space. Carter had claimed the corner near the copier, phone still in hand, thumbs idle as if the device might purr to life on its own. Blake perched on a stool with a briefcase in front of him, one finger tapping the latch, a rhythm that did not match any song in the world. Their confidence had taken on a looser edge now that the room had swallowed the big gestures required by a public set of stairs. Inside, with policy laminated on the walls, choices were harder to dress as inevitabilities. Name for the log, a desk sergeant said without looking up. He wore the weary professionalism of someone who had been the hinge between mess and order for longer than he would ever bother to count. He slid the logbook across the counter with 2 fingers. Angela rose and stepped close enough to read the line headings. "I will sign," she said, "once the entry accurately reflects what is happening. You have my identification number. Your scanner can verify the badge and record the time. So, all." "We will get to that," the sergeant replied. "The way a man says we will get to mowing the lawn when the clouds already look like rain. Now is the time," Angela said, and her voice was gentle because she intended to be heard. "The badge log is the first link in your chain of custody. You know that." The sergeant's eyes flicked up and then back down. "Sit tight," he said. "We have a lot going on." "End the orgy. Memorial Day," Carter said, as if that explained everything and proved a point nobody had made. On the bench along the wall, a guarded teenager slumped under the weight of a borrowed hoodie, a public defender at his side murmuring a patient monologue about appearances and answers. A courier in a navy polo leaned against his dolly, reading the text, his boxes stacked like obedient soldiers. The room kept doing what rooms like this do, making the extraordinary look routine and the routine feel unavoidable. Angela glanced toward the doorway and found Thomas Miller there, the bailiff's uniform immaculate, his gaze steady in a way that steadied the air around him. He entered the room with a nod to the sergeant and the respectful little half-smile he used for people under stress. He did not look at Angela first, because he knew how rooms like this read any glance as a signal. He crossed to the counter, spoke softly to the sergeant, and then turned to Angela with that same modest gravity that made defendants breathe easier when he spoke their names. "Ma'am," he said, in a tone that belonged in a courtroom and nowhere else. "Do you need water?" "Not yet," she said. "Thank you." Reynolds shifted. "We are processing," he told Thomas. Territory staked with 2 dry words. "We will let you know when we need the courtroom." "Salao." Thomas's posture did not alter, but his role filled the space like a steady tide. "Understood," he said. "I am here to facilitate whatever the court requires." Reynolds made a small huffing sound that could have been a laugh or a cough. "The court is busy. Always," Thomas said, which acknowledged the truth and changed nothing. A deputy wheeled past with a gray cart rattling under a stack of plastic bins. The radio on his belt crackled and fell silent. Angela let the sounds arrange themselves into a pattern she could follow. The steps, the voices, the ring of a phone, the slight sticking creak of the copier cover. The pattern helped locate the seam where something new might be slipped in. "Sergeant," she said, "I am formally asking that you preserve all surveillance from the main hallway, the front steps, and the lobby area from the morning of Memorial Day, from early morning to early afternoon." She enunciated the words in full, not with numerals, so that any transcript would carry the sentence as human speech and not as a rattle of digits. That includes security cameras and any devices issued to your officers that sync to your server. Reynolds half turned. We know how to handle our own data. That is what I am ensuring, Angela said. We both want a complete record. The sergeant tapped his pen on the counter, not looking up. You can make those requests through counsel. 随便, I am making them now, she said, and let the stillness after the sentence underline it. Your policy allows subjects to state preservation requests during processing. You keep a note at the bottom of the form for that purpose. The surgeon's pen stopped. He flipped a page, found the line, and made a small mark that could mean anything. Noted, he said. Carter leaned to Reynolds and muttered, She talks like a manual. Blake smirked and then hid the expression by reaching for the briefcase latch again. Do not, Angela said, without raising her volume, open that case again without the receipt and the witness with a pen. Blake withdrew his hand not because he had been commanded, but because the sentence had described an order of things that sounded like relief, even to the person who believed he did not need it. We will get a receipt, he said, uncertain which he had just enrolled himself in. They moved her from the plastic chair to a holding bench near the hallway so the flow could swallow her without friction. The hallway was cooler, the air stirred by a vent that thrummed with a note a singer might use to tune. The paint on the baseboard had been chipped by years of cards and cuffs. Angela moved like a person who was familiar with waiting and refused to be held by it. Afternoon calendar is heavy, Carter said to no one in particular. Like a man who has walked past a line and wants the line to be impressed by his pace. Blake, now leaning near the bench, lowered his voice as if the change in volume changed responsibility. You want to tell us again what office you say you work in? The sentence had the shape of kindness, but none of the intention. I've already told you, Angela said repeatedly. She did not add that repetition is not a test of truth, only of stamina. Thomas returned and stood near enough to be counted by any camera as part of the room, far enough to avoid being counted as part of a confrontation. Ma'am, he said, very softly, would you like me to reach the administrative office? Reynolds said, no, over Thomas's last word, as if interruption could erase proposal. Angela addressed Thomas as if they were in court, and the record needed clarity. Please inform the administrative office that the badge verification lane has been bypassed. Note the time in words. Request that they prepare to confirm my entry permissions as soon as I am escorted inside. Thomas nodded once, the respectful acknowledgement of someone who believes instructions are a kind of civility. He stayed where he was, eyes neutral. Because a bailiff knows that movement in the wrong moment can be misread as escalation rather than help. They walked her to a small room used for first appearances, the space designed to be dignified even when the circumstances were not. A worn Bible sat on a shelf beside a dictionary that had lost its dust jacket. The flag in the corner had been dusted recently. The gold fringe still held its stiff line. The walls carried framed photographs of judges and clerks from years when shoulder pads were wide and ties were bright. Air from a vent whispered along the ceiling and fell across the seating like a blessing. Judge William Harris entered with a file under his arm, and the kind of caution that belongs to people who believe in process even when it feels slower than the moment requires. His hair was thin, his spectacles resting low in a way that suggested he had been reading at a desk just minutes earlier. He took his chair at the small bench, nodded to the sergeant, and looked over the top of his glasses. Counselor Harrison is on her way, the sergeant said quickly, as if the speed of the announcement could serve as apology for everything the day had already done. We can begin preliminaries. We will begin by orienting ourselves, Judge Harris said, the vowel soft as fabric. I want to understand why we are here rather than in the verification lane just past that door. Reynolds' chin lifted slightly, then dropped. Carter's phone, now face down in his pocket, buzzed against fabric like a distracted bee. Blake studied the corner of the carpet where a seam did not quite match an adjacent square. Angela spoke without preface, because prefaces can sometimes be used to hide what needs to be said. Your Honor, the officers elected to prevent me from using the badge verification process. I requested preservation of all surveillance and body-worn recordings from the steps and the hallway. I am asking the court to order immediate preservation and to permit a brief delay so that footage from the cameras covering the main entrance and lobby can be accessed and reviewed. Judge Harris regarded her over the rims of his glasses. You are familiar with these procedures. I am, she said. The judge looked to the sergeant. Is the footage readily accessible? It takes time to pull, the sergeant said, defaulting to the indefinite. How much time? The judge asked, not unkindly, but with a sort of precision that can pull the slack out of vague answers. A short while, the sergeant said. Words are not units, Judge Harris replied, which drew Thomas's eyes, if not his smile. Bailiff, can we coordinate with the building security office to retrieve the relevant intervals expeditiously? Yes, Your Honor, Thomas said. He did not move yet. He waited for the order that would turn intention into instruction. Prosecutor Linda Harrison arrived with a tablet and a folder, cheeks bright from the rush, hair a touch out of place in a way she would correct without a mirror. Apologies, she said to the judge, then set the folder down and glanced at the lineup of bodies, her eyes pausing a fraction at Angela, not with recognition but with the unformed sense that a face meant more than the circumstances suggested. We can proceed. One typhoon de gaude. Before we proceed, Judge Harris said, I am entertaining a request to review readily available video. If the footage resolves what words are failing to resolve, we save time for everyone. Harrison measured that suggestion against the calendar she carried in her head and the confidence she carried in her pocket. The state believes the narrative is clear, she said. No need to delay. The court, the judge replied, would prefer clarity on the basis of evidence rather than narrative. He tapped the file with a finger, a small percussion to keep rhythm. Bailiff coordinate with security. Sergeant, ensure that any body-worn recordings from the relevant officers are not overwritten or erased pending further order. Reynolds made a small, almost inaudible sound. Carter scratched his temple as though confused by an itch that had arrived without a reason. Blake's hand descended from the briefcase like a flag surrendering wind. Judge Harris looked toward Angela. We will stand by a brief period while the footage is retrieved, he said. We will not turn a half hour into an afternoon. A brief delay is sufficient, Angela said. The judge nodded, a gesture that folded agreement into the room. He checked the time on the wall clock, then said it aloud in words, the way a person writes a date out in longhand so no one can mistake the month for the day. Let us reconvene when we have the first clip. Bailiff, stay close to the door. Sergeant, notify me as soon as security is ready to send the file. The room relaxed just enough for the chairs to creak. Nobody admitted it, but everyone felt how decision had returned to the bench where it belonged. Harrison scanned her tablet, thumb sliding like a metronome. Reynolds examined a spot on the wall above the judge's head, a neutral space to rest a gaze. Carter pulled a pen from his pocket, then put it back. Blake folded his arms and unfolded them, lost in the choreography of uncertainty. In the hush that settled over the small room, Thomas moved to the threshold. He did not hurry. He did not make a show of purpose. He lifted his eyes to Angela, and there was, for the first time that day, the lightest trace of warmth in them, as if he had found a handhold on the cliff. Thomas Miller glanced at Angela and gave a small nod as if signaling that something was on its way from the building security office. The small hearing room waited in a poised quiet, the kind that settles when the difficult truth is about to ask for a chair. Judge William Harris sat forward, elbows light on the bench, making space for the business of evidence. The flag in the corner barely stirred in the breath of the vent. Memorial Day sounds leaked in from the avenue as a soft, distant tide. Thomas Miller stood at the threshold with an external drive in a tamper evidence sleeve and a paper acknowledging transfer, his bearing careful as a man carrying glass. Security arrived with a card and a compact monitor, cords looped like discipline ropes. A technician with a courthouse badge clipped to his belt asked the judge's leave to connect. Judge Harris granted it with a nod and spoke into the hush, so the record would carry the shape of the moment. The court would review limited exterior and lobby footage from the morning, and only for the purpose of clarifying the claims before it. He stated the hour in words, as if writing a date longhand across the top of a ledger. Prosecutor Linda Harrison stood close to counsel table, tablet unlocked in her hand, the blue light painting her knuckles. She had built an orderly story in her head on her way over, and orderly stories do not enjoy being rearranged by pictures. Reynolds positioned himself near the back of the room with Carter and Blake, uniforms neat, faces settling into the professional blankness that law enforcement wears when the atmosphere grows official. The first clip materialized on the monitor. a sunlit rectangle of the front steps. The camera's calm eye took in the morning. Banners, passers-by, the bronze scales in the plaza, the courier's dolly rattling, the vendor with a cooler of ice that rang like bells. In the left margin of the frame, Angela came into view, moving with the unhurried precision of habit. She paused to adjust her briefcase strap. The officers under the portico shifted. The tape did not hurry. It did not need to. It simply held the world still so the room could look at what it had already done. Inside the held stillness, the conversation played in pantomime. Angela offered identification. Reynolds did not take it. She gestured toward the interior lane. He did not turn. Carter angled his phone as if filming familiarity itself. Blake's cup made a small hollow flex as his fingers squeezed the lid. The camera caught posture and spacing, how one man inserted his body into the path of another person, how invitation toward process was answered with a shadow that widened. It did not blare. It showed. Judge Harris cleared his throat only once. "Play the next interval," he said when the first clip ended. The technician tapped the keys. The lobby camera came alive, a wide view of magnetometers and bins and clerks in summer suits. Through the glass, the figures on the steps were smaller, but their choices were the same. The entry lane that would have scanned an employee badge in a breath remained unused. The desk where a receipt would have been written remained unattended by the people who needed to attend it. The picture made no accusation and needed none. Harrison lifted her chin as if allowing a better angle for the facts. "The state notes," she began in a voice that hoped to steer, "that video can lack context. Then we will give it context." Judge Harris said, gentle and immovable, "Do we have any body-worn recordings available for immediate review?" The technician looked to the sergeant, who looked to Reynolds, who kept his eyes on the monitor as if stillness could resolve what movement had not. The sergeant spoke. "A backup file from one unit has synced to the server. The rest are pending." "Load the available file," the judge said. "We will not try to watch the whole morning. We will watch just enough to decide whether to keep pretending we do not know what we know." "Tight?" The sound in the room changed when the body-worn recording began. It was not loud. It was simply close, the way a person's breath sounds when he leans over a table. The microphone picked up the scrape of shoe on stone, the lift of fabric, a murmur at the edge of the frame that did not belong to vocabulary so much as to attitude. Then came words, not shouted, only spoken in a tone that had decided something about the person it addressed long before facts had been offered. "Angela, seated where a person sits, who is expected to answer rather than question, kept her eyes on the screen and let her breath shape itself into even measures. She did not flinch. She allowed the tape to carry what she had already placed in words. She had long believed that sound and image, when they belong to a place of public duty, should be allowed to speak their plainest language. In the corner of the room, Carter's shoulders tightened under his uniform. Blake crossed his arms and uncrossed them. Reynolds looked thinner in the fluorescent light than he had on the steps, as if the room itself had taken a degree of warmth from him. Harrison's mouth pressed into a line that was not quite defense and not yet reconsideration. Thomas stood as if carved from the routine of the building, a guardian of the space, expression hedged by courtesy. The clip ended with the unmistakable refusal of the verification desk, the offer turned down, the interior process rejected in favor of an improvised authority on stone. The technician paused, thumb hovering over the spacebar as if the key had become heavier during the recording. For a long two breaths, nobody spoke. Then Angela asked the judge, in the voice one uses when asking the court for a simple order that should not be complicated, to preserve every relevant interval of footage and every backup from every camera and device that recorded the morning, from early morning to early afternoon. Judge Harris granted the request aloud so the record would hold him to it. Harrison searched for the farthest defensible ground and found the need to proceed. "Your Honor," she said with a professional steadiness that did not quite hide her discomfort, even if there were irregularities at the door. "The state still has..." "The state," Judge Harris said with a softness that was not indulgence, "has an interest in a meaningful process. If the entry was withheld against policy, if the simplest verification was refused, then the court will not proceed on a script that depends on those refusals. We will see this clearly." He turned to the technician. "Do we have the lobby interior close-up?" The camera switched again. The lens looked past the magnetometer cue into the glass, capturing the discussion on the threshold as if the building itself had been trying to understand what its front steps were doing. The picture compressed the distance between an offered badge and a decision not to hold it. In the reflection, Angela could be seen speaking with the measured calm of a person maintaining a bridge while others tested its planks. Judge Harris folded his hands. "That is sufficient," he said at last. "We will return to it if we need to, but we will not pretend this is ambiguous." Silence reshaped itself into attention. Angela rose with the quiet that belongs to turning a page. She asked the court's permission to submit a short verification from the administrative office about her credentials. Nothing elaborate, simply the internal entry log for the morning and the correspondence confirming her access. Thomas produced the sealed envelope from the doorway, laid it on the clerk's table, and stepped back as if he were placing a hymn on a lectern and letting the song go where it needed to go. Judge Harris glanced at the one-page confirmation and read out the essentials in words so that a voice rather than a number would carry them. Employee name, authorization level, door access times, office location. It took less than a minute, an ordinary minute that a different choice at the steps would have granted the building without trouble. The room's temperature changed then, not by a degree, but by a kind of moral draft, as if someone had cracked the window and let better air in. Angela turned to Thomas and spoke in a low tone that carried just far enough for the bench to hear. Thomas left the doorway and returned with a long garment bag and a polished wooden case. He did not rush. He opened the garment bag with the reverence a person uses when unwrapping something that belongs to a ceremony larger than the people present. The black robe rested within its folds, catching the room's light. He set the wooden case on the table and stepped back. Angela's posture did not change much when she reached for the robe. She had learned long ago to let the authority of the garment belong to the office rather than to the person wearing it. She lifted the robe and let it fall over her shoulders with movements practiced often enough to be spare. The fabric found its places across her arms and along her sides. She smoothed it once, just below the collar. An old habit. The room, without being told, stood a little taller. Harrison's fingers tightened around the folder she had been holding, the cardstock wrinkling to her grip. Carter stopped fidgeting without realizing that he had. Blake set his jaw in a way that made him appear younger, not sterner. Reynolds found he had nothing to do with his hands. Angela moved to the front of the room, carrying the wooden case as one carries a familiar tool. She stopped where a person stops who has spoken from that position many times. Her voice came as a low, even beam, the tone that turns a room into a place where speech can land safely. She gave her name, and she gave her office, not as a boast, but as a plainest description of her duty. She said that the morning had asked all of them to remember what a public building is for and how people in uniform and people in robes and people in street clothes are meant to meet one another inside it. She did not raise a warning. She raised a standard. Judge Harris, face composed, inclined his head. He had been filling a seat on behalf of an absent colleague, and now the colleague stood where the seat expected her to be. He shifted out of the chair with the respectful economy of someone stepping aside for his own teacher. The bailiff adjusted the room by a syllable, nothing more, and the room adjusted back. Harrison began, "Your Honor," and then stopped, because the titles had realigned and the words had to realign with them. Angela thanked the court for preserving the footage and for clarifying the morning. She did not spend breath on humiliation or anger. She spoke about the value of process and the shape of fairness. She asked, in the same measured tone, for the officers' names to be placed in the record and for their equipment to be secured. She asked for an outside review not because she wished to perform accountability, but because she wished it to be real. The room breathed as one. Somewhere, in the corner of the courthouse where a clerk kept a bowl of peppermint, someone paused with a piece of candy halfway to the dish and listened, though she could not hear the words from where she stood. Outside, trumpet notes rose and folded back into the afternoon. A city keeping its holiday even while a small room inside it tried to honor what the holiday asked people to honor. Reynolds stepped back half a pace without seeming to choose it. Harrison's knuckles widened around her folder until it creased. The entire courtroom held its breath as Angela moved toward the bench, her voice low. "Now, we will do this by the book." Judge William Harris spoke each instruction with a steadiness that returned the room to its proper shape. He affirmed in words the preservation of all recordings from early morning to early afternoon, the securing of each device, the notation of names and times, the careful transfer of custody. He stated that any charge against Angela arising from the events on the steps would not proceed, and he gave the reason with the clarity of a clock striking the hour. Policy had been available and refused. The plain means of verification declined. The sergeant wrote as the judge spoke, pen scratching the page in a rhythm that sounded like order finding its footing again. Reynolds stood very still, the stillness of a man whose habits had been addressed directly at last. Carter kept his eyes on the point above the wall clock as if reading a script that was no longer on the page. Blake nodded to nothing, as if nodding could turn back a sentence already spoken into the record. Angela remained in the robe. The cloth did not make her taller, but it did make the space taller around her. She thanked the court for its attention to process and asked in an even voice for notice to be sent to the administrative office and the building security about the continuing preservation order. Judge Harris agreed and added that an independent body should be asked to review the morning's conduct for training and accountability. The words did not have the sting of punishment. They carried instead the weight of a door opening into a room where grown people agreed to learn. When the session closed, the door adjacent to the bench opened again, and Chief Judge Susan Mitchell entered with the unhurried decisiveness of someone who has learned that speed is less important than direction. She spoke briefly with Judge Harris at the side of the room, then faced the parties without theatrics. Her voice was low, the kind that carries farther than a shout. She said the court would issue a written directive by the end of the day that reaffirmed verification procedures at all federal entries and that every officer who staffed the threshold would receive refresher training under supervision. She added that any future deviation would be treated not as a difference of opinion, but as a failure to follow policy. The words were not sharp, they were simply clear. Angela did not claim the moment. She let it belong to the building that had been askew and now, at least for this hour, stood straighter. Thomas Miller guided the transfer papers across the clerk's table with the attentiveness of a man placing a hymn book back in his pew. Harrison, to her credit, approached the bench and acknowledged that the state would cooperate fully with the preservation order and the review. In her voice, there was a thread of something that might become regret, given air and time. In the hallway outside the hearing room, the air moved cooler. The glossy floor reflected the ceiling lights like a river under a sky. Angela walked without hurry beside Thomas, who carried the empty garment bag and the wooden case. No one stopped them. No one crowded their steps with explanation or small talk. A clerk passed with a stack of files, hugged to her chest, and the peppermint tucked in her cheek, the faint scent of it trailing after her like winter in a warm room. At the security desk, a younger officer lifted his chin in a silent greeting that landed like a promise to do better. A few floors up, in the administrative office, a pair of staffers stood from their desks as Angela entered, the way people rise when a ceremony asks them to stand. They did not fuss. One brought a glass of water, set it on a coaster, and stepped back. The director, a careful man with careful sleeves, produced the entry log and a brief confirmation letter about badge protocols and offered both with two hands. Angela read, signed where a signature belongs, and thanked him by name. Names matter, especially on days when titles have borne the weight. By mid-afternoon, the Memorial Day parade had finished its bright procession. Streets reopened as if a tide had gone out and left the curbs damp with confetti. Angela stepped through the courthouse lobby and out into late sun, the warmth reaching for her through stone. The plaza no longer thrummed. It exhaled. People walked by in the softened afterlight that followed ceremony. A veteran in a cap stood quietly at the bronze scales, one hand resting on the emblem as if greeting an old friend. He saw Angela and tipped his head with the gentle respect of a man who has watched someone do a hard thing without theater. She returned the nod and kept moving. On the corner near the courthouse sat a diner that held itself open like a reliable book. The windows wore a clean shine. The red stools at the counter knew the measure of 1,000 breakfasts. Angela pushed the door and let the bell ring once, a single note. The waitress behind the counter looked up and smiled in a way that warmed more than 1 square foot of air. "Good to see you, ma'am," she said. that soft southern music in the vowels. You want your sweet tea with lemon or plain? Angela said, lemon, please, and took a booth by the window so the day could sit across from her and tell its story at a reasonable pace. The tea came cold and bright. Condensation gathered and made a slow ring on the paper placemat. A small plate of cornbread arrived without being asked, which is one of the generous customs of some American diners, an unprized kindness that still knows the arithmetic of hospitality. Angela thanked the waitress by name when she read it on the tag, and she added a tip that spoke clearly. Not a flourish, not a reward for performance, but a respect paid to the time and attention of a person who remembered that lemon is not a fact but a kindness. Out on the sidewalk, a city crew lifted barricades into the back of a truck, the clans irregular and somehow companionable. She let her shoulders sink into the red vinyl and let her breath deepen. She had not raised her voice. Now she did not need to lower it. She thought of the morning's physics, the way space can be narrowed by one person's posture and opened by a sentence that calls policy by its proper name. She thought of the camera bubble in the corner of the processing room and of the quiet courage of a logbook line written exactly when it should be. She thought of the clerk with the peppermint bowl and hoped the woman had taken one for herself. A couple of booths over, two elders spoke softly about grandsons, military service, and the parade's trumpet solo. Their talk carried that kindly authority older Americans have when they measure a day by the way people behave rather than by what people say about it on television. They pay their bill in cash, tuck bills beneath a salt shaker, and told the waitress, "Thank you, sweetheart," in a tone that made it praise rather than presumption. Angela felt the sound of their voices settle her as much as the tea did. Her phone, face down on the table, vibrated once, a message from the clerk's office confirming that the written order would be circulated by early evening. Another note from the administrative director promised an all-staff email about entry protocol training, drafted in plain language, free of scolding, anchored in steps. One more from a reporter she knew to be fair asked if she wanted to offer comment. She did not. The story, for now, belonged to the record and to those whose job it is to read records carefully. As late afternoon leaned toward evening, Angela left the diner and walked a slow block beneath trees that had found ways to grow in narrow squares of soil. Children laughed around the fountain. A buzz breathed at the curb. A street musician polished his instrument with a cloth as if it had sung too hard and needed praise. Angela passed a storefront where a television showed a news anchor speaking over silent footage of the courthouse steps. She did not stop. She already knew the rhythm of those images. She had felt it beneath her feet. Back in chambers, she sat for a short while with a yellow pencil and a legal pad, the old tools that hold a different kind of electricity. She wrote a list with small, even handwriting. Call to thank Judge Harris, note to Chief Judge Mitchell about training modules she had seen work well, proposal to host a listening session for local counsel, security staff, and clerks, an invitation to a community liaison who knew how to draw neighbors into rooms they had been told were not theirs. She added a line to remind herself to ask Thomas about the young person in the hoodie in the processing room, whether the public defender had what he needed, whether anyone had offered the boy water. The building changed tone as evening approached. Elevators sighed less often. Footsteps dwindled. Somewhere a vacuum began its low, patient song. Angela set the rope back in its garment bag with the care of returning a tool to its case. She did not put it away as if she were putting the day to bed. She put it away as one puts away a thing to be used again tomorrow, with the same respect and the same restraint. Before she left, she stood for a moment at the window and looked down at the plaza where the bronze scales caught a last slant of Sunday. She thought of what days like this can do to a person's faith and what a person's faith can do to a day like this. She did not run her hand over the robe sleeve for luck. She believed in something sturdier than luck. Habit, training, the insistence on small right things done at the right moment, spoken in words that clarify rather than inflame. She locked the door, walked the quiet hallway, and pressed the elevator button. In the lobby, the security officer from earlier stood with a clipboard, checking end-of-day deliveries with the calm care that had been missing on the steps. He looked up and met Angela's eye. "Have a good evening, ma'am," he said. This time the word carried itself straight. You too, she said, and meant it. Outside, the sky had softened to that clear blue that sometimes follows a hard afternoon, as if the air itself had decided to be gentle. Streetlights blinked awake. The courthouse, square and shore, watched the block with its many windows gaze. Angela crossed to the parking lot, the cool beginning to settle on the asphalt. She did not rehearse speeches in her head. She did not argue with ghosts. She let the day be what it had been and let the evening begin to form its own purposes. Her phone buzzed once more on the passenger seat, a quiet nudge rather than a demand. Angela's phone buzzed an email inviting her to speak at the state's Justice Reform Forum. She drew a long breath. A new journey had begun. In the hush after the long day, when the courthouse lights dimmed and the streets of Atlanta settled into evening, what remained was not the clash of voices or the sound of handcuffs, but the quiet insistence of truth finding its way through. The story had carried its way through misunderstanding, pride, and power misused. Yet, it ended with clarity and the robe placed where it belonged. It reminded us that dignity does not shout. It stands steady until seen. The lesson is plain but never easy. Prejudice may try to cloud our vision, yet fairness, spoken calmly and lived faithfully, can part that fog. We all know moments, whether in the courtroom or at a kitchen table, when choosing patience over anger keeps the door open for grace. Like the steady flame of a candle in the window, a simple act of respect can guide others safely home through the darkest streets. So let us pause with that image and carry it into our own neighborhoods. If this story touched you, consider passing along a kind word or a listening ear to someone who feels unseen. It may be the smallest gesture, yet for another soul, it could become the measure of justice they will remember.